Charles R. Floyd spent 50 years building churches, and now he is breaking down scripture. Charles is a Navy veteran. He's a born-again Christian with degrees in science, business, theology, and law. And Charles tackles the stark contrast between the Bible and the Quran in his book, Truth versus Chaos. The full title is A Comparative Analysis of the Bible with the Quran, and it's not just academic, it's a call to deeply examine what and why. So if you're the kind of person that says, what is it all about, right? What's life? What's religion? And how can I better live a life, right? Free of confusion, knowing what I want and knowing how to help others. This is the most important podcast we'll listen to. So Mr. Charles R. Floyd, glad to see you, glad to speak with you.
It's our pleasure to be here. It's our
All
pleasure to
right.
be here.
All right. So, what did I leave out of the introduction? What currently just has you so fired up, excited? What's the message to tell the world?
Well, I think it's time that the world started doing a little bit of critical thinking. Get away from this listening to the pundits, listening to the talking heads, and start doing a little thinking on your own.
Okay.
And that's what prompted me to begin to think through this thing was I needed to know why. Why in the world would a peaceful religion do the kinds of things they're doing? And as I got delved into the Quran and I studied that thing, I read it twice, and then I broke it down and studied it extensively. And during that time, it began to be obvious to me that there, there's there's so many differences, and I guess as a beginning, you got to realize that Muhammad was he had a very shallow understanding of scriptural concepts. He he took stories out of the particularly the Old Testament and butchered them to the point to where you just had to when you lay them side by side to the Bible. And the Bible is so much more in depth, has so much more things in it that delve with lessons learned and application of those lessons. Where the Quran is just it's set up as a work doctrine religion. And about 50% of this book is the disparity in the analysis of the two scriptures. Then it gets into the works versus the grace of the idea of being able to live your life in a righteous manner. As a Christian, we get our righteousness from Christ. Muhammad says you work your way into heaven. If you want those 72 brown-eyed virgins, you're going to work your way into it. And the bottom line is that nobody's good enough until you get to the jihad section, which is another part of the book. And outlining each of the scriptures in the Quran that delve into the jihad, what you find out is that over and over again, the only person assured of going to Allah's heaven is someone who's martyred. Now, break that down just a little and you think about it and you say, well, if a guy goes in, he fights for Allah and he does battle with the enemy, the infidels, and he comes out alive, he's still got the rest of his life to work his way into heaven. Whereas that poor guy that gets killed on the battlefield, he's got a direct shot. So another part of this thing, which really baffles me, is the fact of the timing. Muhammad lived in the 5th and 6th century AD. The Bible was canonized, including the New Testament, about the 3rd century, which means that he had 300 years to understand these scriptures. The other thing that really just blows my mind is the fact that Paul is never mentioned in the Quran. Yet the Quran only was put into written format in the 1900s. Prior to that, it was, according to the books I've read, it was an oral religion up to that point. And the idea is that these surahs or these chapters or these books within the Quran are actually compilations of sermons that Muhammad did, that he performed throughout his career. So consequently, when you break all of that down, and you begin to think about the illumination of the expulsion of Paul. Now, Paul wrote about a third of the New Testament, and most of his writings are doctrine and application for life lessons on what the Gospels actually present. What Jesus, I had an Old Testament professor one time years ago told me, he says, what the Old Testament implies becomes an imperative in the New Testament. There's 300 prophecies of Christ throughout the Old Testament. When he was born and lived his ministry and died, resurrected, and ascended, that was the culmination. That was the imperative of all of the implications that arrive through the Old Testament. I'll give another part of the timing aspect of this. It best served as an example. Gideon in the book of Judges in the Bible, he brought together about 10,000 warriors to go up against the Midianites. Now, if you study the book of Genesis pretty clearly, Midian was a son of Abraham and Keturah, his third wife. After Sarah and Hagar, then came Keturah. Well, by this time, the Median has become the Midianites, has become a nation of its own. So Gideon goes in and he's going to go in to do battle with them. And God tells him, he says, go to the river. Those who lap like a dog in the water, take those into battle. Leave the rest of them behind. Send them home. 300 men left. God says, I'll deliver the Midianites into your hands. He did. Go to the Quran for that same story, and it talks about Saul battling Goliath and the Philistines. Now, the problem gets to be is not only the participants, but Saul is relegated to the book of Kings, whereas Gideon was in the book of Judges. There's about 80-year disparity there. So the timing is beyond the pale as far as that goes. So as you go through this thing, and that first part of the book outlines most of these disparities, and the fourth part of the book is discriminatory practices, and particularly women as chattel property. They have no rights. And realize this is 300 or 400 years after Christ and Paul both said there is no Jew, there is no Gentile, there is no slave, there is no master, there is no male, there is no female. They all are equal under God's eyes. So how can that inequality exist? And what on earth would a self-respecting woman of today convince herself to follow that kind of an outline? It goes beyond reason. There's 114 surahs in the book of Quran. They're longest at the front, and they diminish as they go through in length to the end of them. So if anybody ever wants to read it, it is not what I would call entertaining reading.
Okay.
The works doctrine that's outlined there is just absolutely every other page he's going through. If you're righteous, if you're good, you'll go to heaven. If you're not good, the recompense will be hell. And it goes over and over and over that. But that the whole timing about, in particular, Paul, there's no explanation for Paul's omission. And it's as you get into the Quran, you find that Muhammad had a special dispensation from Allah to have as many wives as he wanted. He had 10 at one point, yet any other man had only 4. So this the lack of continuity. Now my background is a large part engineering,
Okay.
and I follow the laws of the benchmark. I got to have a benchmark to start any project. If I don't have that, I can maneuver a building or a project or a tool or whatever else all over the place and never have a benchmark. The Bible is my benchmark. And that's, for all intent and purposes, that's where I back this whole process into. And I'm sure the Islamic faith would say the same thing about the Quran. But I want people to critically think this thing through. If I never sell a book, the book is there for posterity if they want to see it. It's there. I have no. The last part of the book is my conclusions, and that's basically the smallest part of the book, because I'm not here to defend anything. I'm just here to present facts. I've set this thing up very similar to a cause of action lawsuit,
Okay.
where the Quran he testifies to his meaning. The Bible takes the same story and testifies to his meaning. And then I, as a closing argument, show you what the differences are and why it's important to make the differences. Does all that make sense, Robert?
It does, and it's good that you've jumped into this and figured this all out for the rest of us, right? Because it is important to have your faith, to have your beliefs, to live by rules, to be a good person. And I know that you said, okay, you laid out those conclusions and we can decide for ourselves, but in the spirit of only having a few minutes left on this podcast, do you think are there any of those conclusions really relevant today? If someone is questioning their faith or maybe not deep enough in their religion, what should people know about these differences and conclusions?
3 times through this book, I go into how a person has to make one decision in his life. What do you do with this man Jesus? What do you do with him? You either accept him, or Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, if you're not for me, you're against me. So you've made the decision if you don't decide to use him as your Lord and Savior. So consequently, that is basically a premise that I'll always testify to. The second thing is that I tried to be as fair as possible, given the innate bias that we all have in our own beliefs. I tried to be as fair as I could, but it was frustrating at times to see the shallowness of some of the aspects of some of the writings in the Quran. As a pictorial, he says at one point in time, he says, Zechariah, you know who Zechariah was? He was the father of John the Baptist. He and his wife Elizabeth were ancient and long in the tooth and ancient years. And Gabriel came to him and says, you're going to have a son. He says, oh, I'm too old. My wife's too old. You're an unbelief. He muted him literally for 9 months of his waiting on John to be born. In the Quran, it says he was muted for 3 days. These are the kinds of things that it's unacceptable, and there's a reason why. And he says in the Quran, it says that it was because of he was a good man. He was being rewarded for being good. Well, that's not true. we all have our fleshly, carnal desires, methods, means, and whatever else that we call sin. We all have that. But by and large, what we don't have is the righteousness that we glean from knowing Christ.
I like it. We need to hear that, right? We need to live by a good example and do our best to get into heaven, but also make the world we live in a better place for everyone. And so, as far as like you've drawn all these conclusions, would you say is there like an ultimate conclusion out of everything you studied, learned, compared? Is there like a number one top lesson from all of your research and writing?
Yeah, Allah is not God.
Okay.
Whatever he is not God. The only other religion on this planet that I'm aware of, I believe, was Joseph Smith in Utah when he met the angel in the cave. That's a very similar story to what Muhammad did in the cave in Medina.
Okay.
So consequently, these things, the parallels that I draw there is just, and that's not in the conclusion. That's for specialty.
Okay.
But the idea is that we just need to know what we believe. When I went in service, I deviated from my beliefs. I totally went wild for a period of time. But I came back in 1984. I came back to it. I said, I've got to know what I believe. And I did. That's when I went back and got a Bachelor of Arts degree of all things in biblical studies, just to be able to understand what I needed to believe. We have got to know. We'll never have peace otherwise. We'll never have peace. We'll be searching, seeking, whatever term you want to use. We'll be doing it for the rest of our lives if we don't understand what we're actually. There's only one decision we have to make in this lifetime. What do you do with Jesus? What do
Okay.
you do with Jesus?
We need to understand what we believe, even though it might be uncomfortable. So, as far as what started all this, right, was like 9/11, and you're wondering about these like extremist hijackers and what does it all mean? And what did that lead you to? What was there a final understanding to make sense of the jihad and all that craziness?
Well, I began to understand that I needed to know what they believed so that I could understand what motivated them to do that. And I read, I don't know, 18 or 20 books from various authors, various Muslim authors. I understand the pillars of their faith. I understand their need to do you know, the working relationships they have to their faith. But what really I fail to understand is how they get to a point to where they can just say, man, life ain't worth living. I'm just going to end it all and take a bunch of people with me. That goes beyond understanding. That goes completely beyond it. That is demonic in its own righteousness, in my opinion,
Okay.
for whatever it's worth.
Okay. Well, it's good to think these things through, right? And to get educated and have an understanding. And if this kind of got you curious and got you wondering, well, what else does Charles R. Floyd have to say? And what am I missing from my own biblical studies and knowing what I believe, what others believe? Then this is a book called A Comparative Analysis of the Bible with the Quran, Truth versus Chaos. Charles R. Floyd explores doctrinal, historical, and theological contrasts between the Bible and the Quran. We're talking about the differences in these themes like grace, mercy, works, and salvation. And he analyzes these scriptural disparities, societal impacts, and interpretations. And you can find it on Amazon by searching for a comparative analysis of the Bible with the Quran. You find the one by Charles R. Floyd. But his website, which is really wonderful and has everything you need all in one place, is charlesrfloyd.com. That last name is Floyd.com. And you can click right there about the book, and the multiple books and find out of his other media appearances and his bios. And there's a blog and there's all kinds of resources. If you say, what does it all mean? If you say, I need to get better educated, I need to know what I believe, what others believe, charlesrfloyd.com is the place to go to get more of what you need to know, right? To get educated and to click over on these books. And as we're headed to charlesrfloyd.com, before I let you go, Charles, it's time for the scary part of the podcast where I try to put you on the spot. I ask you about a quote or lesson that has served you, and you've done so much reading and writing and studying and getting educated. What comes to mind as far as a helpful quote or lesson that has served you that you can pass on to us?
I think the best one that I know of is you know is the second commandment that Christ gave us: love your neighbor as yourself. And that says, break that down just a little bit. If I have to first love myself. I have to first have confidence in what I believe. I have to first be clear about what I believe. Then I can present it and love my neighbor.
Very nice. So we have to find that confidence and love yourself, and then you can love your neighbor, and then you can help others. And so if you want to jump into more of this, that's charlesrfloyd.com. The book is A Comparative Analysis of the Bible with the Quran. It's a thought-provoking study that encourages you to delve deeper into understanding faith and scripture. Mr. Charles R. Floyd, it's been very wonderful and educational having you here. Thanks for being here and helping us out.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.